We started. Again, welcome to Technical Approach to Cloud Cost Management. I'm going to turn the mic over to Steph to lead us in our next hour. Enjoy, everyone. And if you have any questions, feel free to send them in the chat. And of course, participate when time allows it. Thank you and enjoy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Asaf, and welcome to this webinar. We will be focusing on technical approach to cloud cost management, as Elaine said. A couple of words about myself. My name is Asaf Flato. I live in Israel, as you probably must have guessed from the way To Be Cloud is presenting itself. In my off time, when I'm not doing this, I like to drink whiskey in moderation, cycle, and do scuba diving. So those three things usually do not go together, especially the whiskey and scuba diving. And I'm a cloud solution architect at To Be Cloud and a member of the FinOps Foundation. Right, let's get down to brass. Cost management for engineer. When we usually think about cost management, most of you guys, I hope, are engaged in that, but usually thinking about known things like terminating unused resources, reserved nodes, spot instances, unattached disks, storage file life cycles, right sizing, and tagging. Show me in the chat room which of you have done those actions or doing those actions as part of your daily job. A +1 would be yes, thumbs up, or if you're not doing anything, just no comment. That would be good. Oh, I didn't mention my idea is an interactive kind of session, not just me talking, because that would be very boring. So I'd like to have some interaction and to understand some of the background. So if that's okay with you guys, if not, I'll just keep on rambling and we can breeze through this. So again, if you're doing this kind of thing during your work, please raise a hand or +1 in the chat. No one. Okay. So this is not cost management. This is what most people would consider as resource management, but not cost management. Because cost management is not actually relevant to reducing your cost. It's a byproduct. It happens, but when you're doing cost management, what you are actually taking into account is your return on investment. What you need to decide is how to manage the resources you're doing in order to benefit the company best with what you have. I'll give an example. What is a waste? And this one will want people to interact and say what they think. You have a auto-scaling group if you're running AWS, or VMSS if you're running Azure, running 100 VMs with a utilization for a month below 15%, costing you $75,000 a month. Is it a waste? Please tell me if you think it's yes or no. Guys? Yeah. Thank you, Elanit. Anybody else? You can unmute yourself and say yes, no, that's fine. I won't bite anyone. Okay. I'll give it another minute. No one. Okay. So, like Elanit said, from a first glance, this looks like a complete waste. But if you take a look at that, is it a complete waste or not? Considering that 1 hour of downtime for this company would mean a loss of $216,000. This puts it in perspective because it shows us that the $57K that we're paying for that mass of servers that we're not using within perspective, is not worth the loss if we're down for 1 hour. Now, in this particular case, that company used those nodes for an emergency case in case their main service goes down and it has to handle around 2 to 3 million users trying to log in back into the service simultaneously. So they decided that the risk of either losing those users for an hour and losing nearly $216,000 is worth the cost of $57K a month and having been able to sleep quietly at night. So this is the kind of thing we need to take into consideration when we're doing cost management. We need to understand what the business goals of the business is. What are we trying to achieve? Because if it's just cutting cost, yeah, let's shut down the whole production and that will be zero cost, but then again, we have zero business. So we need to understand what the business wants and by that, and how we can support it by managing the cloud cost and managing the cloud expenses. Now, each business has its own set of goals that he needs to answer to when he's evaluating what is the business metric. Some would be page hits like Google, page load times like the BBC, number of active users like Blizzard on their World of Warcraft, how many players are actively playing, subscription. You have those that I don't know how many of you are avid sports users, but there are some applications that track your sports activities and you pay by subscription. You might not be active. They couldn't care if you're active as long as you pay subscription. Or cost per developer, because the company is making so much money, they don't care about the individual feature. They cost how much a feature and developer cost them to actually support a system. So you have to basically decide how are you quantifying your metrics for spending, and based on that, you have to actually evaluate and develop the costs and the expenses that you want to do. Now, let's take the last example, cost per developer. How do you measure that? You have several items that you need to take into consideration. If a developer, the CI flow in a well-established company, you have a developer that is submitting code and triggering a CI flow. That CI flow is cost. Most of the time, in our case, it's handled in the cloud. So it brings up resources, either VMs or sometimes databases, or a plethora of other services that are testing that its feature is working as designed and as planned to make sure that it's first functions, second integrates, and has no regression issues. All that is based on a branch that is testing. Those are costs that we need to amortize and understand how much it costs us per developer and also per branch. Resource allocations is not just what I mentioned, the CI flow, although it also the cost of his laptop, it's all cost of other things. So all the resources that are associated with the developer are also part of the cost that we need to take into account. And of course, there's tagging. Tagging accounts not just for the cloud resources, it also accounts for his tagging of the code that he submits into the GitHub, GitLab, whatever. So you can actually enumerate it by version, by branch, and not just by commit message. Somebody wants to come in. He's a bit late. Okay, so these are the things that you need to take into account when you're measuring a cost for a functionality. It's not just he's taking 2 VMs and that's the cost of it. There are the side of the how should I say, the surrounding or the ecosystem around those expenses that we need to take into account when we're calculating cost per developer or per other resources. So these are the things we need to talk about. Now, where do we find those understandings and how can we accomplish them or use where we can take them and use to build the cohesive picture about the cost. What tools do we use to understand those KPIs, right? So for instance, if we're talking about cloud resources and usability, like we mentioned in the page hits and the page load numbers, those if you have a good company, you also have network operations, and they can tell you by their metrics how a specific service is functioning, and based on that, you can also take a look at the utilization and response to service, and then you can decide, all right, we're over provisioned, or hopefully you'll never under provision. We're sending services that we don't need. All those things give you a functionality point of view on how a service responds based on what the metrics that you're looking for. And then you also have the developers. Those of us who are technically inclined should look with the developers and go over with them to understand if they're using a third-party package or library. And that could impact load times or functionality times. Sometimes the developers will just take a library because there's one function they need in there, and they will use it because it's convenient. But is it worth using that library because the load time of that library into the VM or the function in the Lambda or anything will slow the response time? So these are the things that we want to take into account and verify with the developers. Product. Again, we want to look at the product because we need to understand what the goal is. If the functionality that the new feature is bringing in, if the requirements are, I don't know, for instance, one place I worked, the requirement was to be able to notify a user for every change that happened in his profile. So you have to have the something that will send emails and something that will push notifications. And all of a sudden, we evaluated how many of those functions will go through a specific service in AWS, and we got into a understanding that the expenditure will reach nearly $600,000 a month. And once we got that, it's basically, okay, we have to pause and rethink the product to understand how to make it cost efficient. And of course, there's the business intelligence. The business intelligence is the prediction of how the growth of the company is about to do, whether it's growing, hopefully, or is it shrinking because of, I don't know, let's say COVID-19, for instance. So you need to plan the cost and adjust the infrastructure based on how the company is predicting its growth and progress. So these things are, So these things are things you need to take into account when you're doing your cost management. This is not usually things that will come into cost reduction. Some of them will actually be, all right, I need to plan for the budget next year. Oh, we're expecting the growth to be X amount. That will mean that the cloud cost will also grow by X amount. And people need to be aware of this. And you need to make sure that you present them and you calculate them based on those factors. One of the things that we have to think about, to understand when we're doing cost optimization, is risk versus reward. Right? Some of the things, like I mentioned previously, people don't want to take the risk because there's a lot of money involved. And we're coming back to the VMS ASG example that I gave. Is the risk of reducing 10% of those VMs, which is $5,600 a month, is the risk of losing the service for 1 hour in case there is an issue worth that reward? Does anybody think that it is? Anybody else? This is again an issue where you have to talk to your product team and the business intelligence, because in that particular case, we were able to present it in in the ways that the business could understand it, and we did manage to reduce the ASG by 30% eventually. But we were able to do it in increments of 5 instances every 2 weeks. So it's a slow and low process, and as soon as, because you do that and you let them understand there is safety in that risk, we're mitigating the risk. But then, okay, and then you can come and tell me, all right, how about you migrate it to something that are low risk, not just reducing the numbers, like spot instances. Now, spot instances, the idea sounds wonderful, right? You have spot instances, they cost you less, but you still keep the capacity. However, spot instances have relatively, because it's an ASG and you need to scale up, they have a lower rate of scale up because you have to negotiate the market, you have to find the right instance type, and if you don't have it, you're a bit stuck. But also, with a service that is high risk, you in spot instances, you have the problem that you might lose the instance at any second, which is creating an even a higher risk when you're dealing with something that needs to handle high volume, and if it drops the connection mid-service of the user, you basically shoot yourself in the leg. You don't want to do that. So another idea is reserved instances. But reserved instances you buy on a family, but you don't know if it's going to be allocated to that specific a scaling group or VMSS. It could be assigned to something else entirely, and you're still paying the full price for those. So again, the risk versus reward is something that you have to weigh in constantly and always communicate and understand it with the product team and the business intelligence. Also, sometimes the NOC can come and tell you, no, this is not a risk we want to take, because they have to handle those things. If something actually happens, it's them that are actually dealing with the first incident or first responders. Okay. This is something that we all have. Whom among you haven't dealt with legacy infrastructure? And I'm sure you guys have it, so please raise your hands. Ido, you guys never had any legacy infrastructure? I don't know if you're running on, of course. Do you know that, and we'll get to it in a minute, but anybody else? Is it, and dealing with the legacy infrastructure, is it because, yeah. And usually people don't want to touch the legacy infrastructure because, please give me the reasons why you don't want to touch the legacy infrastructure. Come on, guys. Don't be shy. While we're waiting for the... don't fox it? Yeah. That's a good way to put it. You sound like the engineer that is trying to explain to his son how does, or his son is asking him, Dad, how does the sun work? He said, it works, don't fix it. It doesn't, don't touch it. But I've worked in a place where when I joined the company, it was a long time ago, the uptime of one of the servers was 2,048 days. Just to make you understand it, the hardware vendor no longer supported the hardware. If we wanted spare parts, we had to go on eBay. And basically we didn't want to touch it, we didn't want to maintain it, we didn't want to replace the hard drives because we didn't understand what was going on there. Now, eventually we didn't have a choice but to replace it because somebody pulled the power cable out of it and we had to reboot it. and the whole hell breaks loose. But in cloud infrastructure, that shouldn't be the problem. Yes, we are dealing with old hardware, but when you're dealing with legacy infrastructure, you also have old code. And most of the times people don't want to touch it is because they don't have the confidence or the knowledge of what is going on in that. Is that a case in most of your cases, guys? Somebody installed it way back when and it left the company and nobody knows how to use it? Nobody knows how to change it? Is that the case? Yeah. Let's go the old story. The problem with that is that the old hardware is actually in AWS is more expensive than the new hardware. It may sound funny because Amazon sometimes shows you the T2 as free. However, it's only free if you're on the free tier. If you're already a paying customer, it's not free. And the T3 and now the new T4s are actually cheaper than the T2. Not to mention that they're also more powerful and you get a better CPU, but you're paying more for T2 than T3. So keeping the old hardware or M3, I just encountered somebody who told me they're running on a T1 server. And that's going to cost, and that's just to tell you how old they are, because they're even in the old version of hardware list of AWS, they no longer exist. So that's a bit of a problem. Now, okay, I think I skipped. No, okay. So let's say you still have the old hardware, but you want to say, okay, I'll buy a commitment for it, RIs. Anything below T3, you don't get the RIs as you get for anything new. You have to pay the full sum upfront. Basically, Amazon is saying, we want to throw it out. You still want it, you pay for it. And you're going to be stuck with it because we don't want it there, right? So you're getting the in regular RIs, full upfront gives you the best possible saving. In the T2s, you only get the upfront, and it's the worst saving you get. You get, I think it's 22% as opposed to regular RI, which gives you 27%. So old hardware costs you more than what you get if you actually go for a newer hardware. Old code. Somebody wrote something, who knows when, left it there and it's running. This usually means that it's an unoptimized code. Some of the times that we encountered this is it was running on a physical box. They took made a VM out of it, uploaded it to the cloud, made it run and forget about it. That usually means it's an unoptimized code. You're running, I don't know, C that's a very problem that might have memory allocation issues, and you're running some code that somebody wrote in Perl 4 or who knows what, PHP 5, God knows, but because it works and nobody knows how to handle it, or nobody wants to handle it, you're paying extra just to keep it there. And you're also going to be paying a lot of money for somebody to rewrite the code, because you don't just pay for the resources in the cloud, you actually have to pay for the developer, to bring in a developer to just rewrite the code. And people will think, oh, that does have no implication on the cloud. So I will redirect you to the slides before. We talked about the CI scale, the CI process, because no rewrite of a code doesn't go without CI, I hope. And again, we're wasting resources in the cloud just to make sure that it's running and we can actually get rid of the old hardware and the old code. Now, all those things that I mentioned, if we want to get people to understand what when we're talking about cost management, how do you communicate it to the higher ups? How do you communicate it to people so they would listen and talk about it, and not in terms that the technical people talk? So you need to talk about saving terms, and not in performance improvement. Most people here, as we mentioned before, are technical, and we tend to think about more CPU, more RAM, better IOPS in the nuts and bolts of the system, how the performance is going to be improved, and how we're going to get better CPU or processing power so we can actually run the functions. That kind of lingo is good if you're talking to an engineer, an architect, or anything. When you're trying to talk to people about finances, the best response you'll get is a blank stare. The worst one is they'll just kick you out of the room. You need to talk to them about the concept they will understand. If you want to upgrade and do it or spend more on a single instance better, but which might increase more on the overall cost, but the increase actually might serve us more users, and more users mean more income for the company. That's something they will understand better, and they will evaluate it based on the ROIs we mentioned before, return on investment. So you invest in bigger hardware or better infrastructure or more advanced infrastructure, you're able to serve more users. That's something, and by that increase the revenue of the company. That is how they actually understand and communicate and will be more attuned to what you're trying to say. You can also use the other one, but reduce the CI cycle, this delay. That's when we're talking about cost per developer. You want to increase the productivity of a developer. So you make sure that the CI cycle is shorter because the processing power or the amount of tests that you can run in parallel is increased for a shorter time. So you have to present it like this. And then you can say that the productivity of the developer is increased by, I don't know, 25%. He can work on 5 features a day instead of 2. These are the metrics and the ways to introduce it so people that are more attuned to financial terms can understand it, and not, oh, we'll get better IOPS. That might work well with your technical people, the developers maybe, but not with when you're talking about cost management and cost efficiency. Also, and one of the biggest things that we need to talk to is long-term versus short-term. Because cost management, cost reduction, like we saw in the beginning, RIs, spots, tagging, unattached disk, all those things are short-term versus long-term. Most of the things with those will be, you'll see the impact in the short term, but if you don't manage them, they'll accumulate and grow back again, and you don't see the saving. You'll see them in the first months, second months, then they're gone. If you do it, if you present the case in the proper way, you're going to be talking about the long-term commitment. Most people, a lot of people, sorry, not most, a lot of people do the commitment for 1 year because they don't know where the company will be or how they manage it. They don't like the fact that it's 3 years. But especially finance people don't want to commit and want to spend the amount of money that the 3-year commitment requires. But if you show them that the longer term commitment will actually reduce and give them a better saving in the long term, because they don't have to incorporate the inflation and the changes in mostly inflation and the fluctuation of the dollar versus whatever currency you're using is negated because they already did the commitment with an upfront payment, then that's something they can relate to and actually would be more happy to accept. Because if you tell them, all right, by investing $10,000 now, we will save $24,000 annually for 3 years, and because you have the 4% interest rate that you don't have to accrue every year because of the changes, they will start thinking about it in a much more kind way, and will actually come to you and consult with you about changes in the future. Also, and this is something that they need to understand, is about managed services, resource allocation. Managed services, for us, it looks like a no-brainer for most of the time, because we basically say it's somebody else's who's dealing with the infrastructure, with all the costs that occur, not the cost, the issues that occur with the services and with the patching and all those things. for the finance people, they want to, if you want to present it, they won't understand it such. They will see only the expenses. When you present it to them, all right, if we do it in-house, it'll cost us X, and we will need Y, Z, and W for the dedicated teams that will actually need to manage this thing, as opposed to H, or whatever number you want to, letter you want to put, which will cost us just for the service, and you can show them the expenses of those two. Then they will start to understand, all right, the benefit of using a managed service where we don't have to hire X amount of people and just put them on dealing with specific resources. Then the monetary value and the understanding of the benefits of a managed service shine through, and they can understand it better. Questions? Because there was no interaction, I managed to flow through most of it quite fast. So I'm hoping you guys have questions. No one? Okay, welcome. So, okay, thank you guys. Sorry it was so short.
Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, feel free to continue sending them in the chat. We have the recording available for you on our YouTube channel. Good day and good evening, wherever you guys at. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.